Session 131, Ordain Women. This is a panel featuring some of the organizers of Ordain Women, an organization advocating women's ordination in the LDS Church. Our mission statement reads, "The fundamental tenets of Mormonism support gender equality. God is male and female, father and mother, and all of us can progress to be like them someday. Priesthood, we are taught, is essential to this process. Ordain Women believes women must be ordained in order for our faith to reflect the equity and expansiveness of these teachings. Last year, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reaffirmed its commitment to equality. The Book of Mormon states," I'm quoting from their statement, "The Book of Mormon states, black and white, bond and free, male and female, all are alike unto God." This is from 2 Nephi. This is the Church's official teaching. Ordain Women embraces this statement. We are committed to work for equality and the ordination of Mormon women to the priesthood. Based on the principle of thoughtful, faithful, faith-affirming strategic action, Ordain Women aspires to create a space for Mormon women to articulate issues of gender inequality that they may be hesitant to raise alone. As a group, we intend to put ourselves in the public eye and call attention to the need for the ordination of Mormon women to the priesthood. Quote, "Among other things, our website, ordainwomen.org, features well over 100 profiles of Mormons who also support women's ordination, and we receive more each week." What are we up to now, Kate?
We've got a lot in the queue.
We have a lot in the queue.
We're at 107.
107 on the website and many in the queue. Panel presenters include Kate Kelly, Hannah Wheelwright, Kaimipono Winger, and me, Laura Ritter. Briefly, Kate has a BA in political science from BYU, a law degree from the American University Washington College of Law, and as of a few months ago, is officially a member of the Washington, D.C. Bar. Hannah is a BYU student majoring in political science with a women's studies minor, and she's also a blogger at Young Mormon Feminists. Kaimi is an associate professor at the Thomas Jefferson Law School in San Diego, a blogger at Times and Seasons, and a Sunstone board member. And basically, the Mormon internet gadfly. I have an MA from BYU in Humanities, was the former managing editor of the Journal of Modern History, and former editor of the Mormon Women's Forum Quarterly. You'll learn a bit more about us and the genesis of Ordain Women in our presentations. However, we wanted the panel format primarily to be interactive. What we'd like to do is each read our profiles from the website and make a few introductory remarks, after which we'll happily entertain questions and brief comments, not only from our audience here at Sunstone, but also from those that were submitted online this week.
Lori, you didn't introduce Hannah.
I did?
Yes, she is. Oh, yes.
Sorry. Margaret, you know.
Wake up. I'll start. Hi, I'm Lori. I'm a wife, mother of 2 wonderful children, occasional writer, crossword puzzler, consumer of chocolate, Colbert Report and Daily Show junkie, Balkan dancer, and recent empty nester. I love a good discussion, particularly at the dinner table, and well-crafted books and films. I've worked as the managing editor of an academic journal, a university instructor, and the public relations coordinator for a state humanities council. I've also happily given countless hours of volunteer service to both my community and my church as compassionate service coordinator, visiting teacher, MIA, or Young Women's president, and a contributor to an earlier edition of the LDS Scriptures. One of Mormonism's most intellectually and spiritually compelling teachings is the belief that God wants to share power and spiritual authority with us, that God's desire is our empowerment. The exclusion of women from priesthood ordination is incompatible with this foundational belief. In his famous letter from Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King wrote, I quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," unquote. We more readily recognize and decry inequity when it's blatantly abusive, but even discrimination that is subtle can negatively affect us in profound ways. To deny women access to decision-making authority in any community, religious or otherwise, opens up a space for the more extreme forms of discrimination and abuse that millions of women in the world endure. This is the first time I've read from a computer rather than a paper. Mormonism teaches that our essential selves are uncreated. Thus, we are free agents, responsible for our choice either to perpetuate this inequity by inaction or to embrace a moral activism that requires us to work for justice and equality. And I'd like to repeat that because that's the core reason I'm here. We are free agents, responsible for our choice either to perpetuate this inequity by inaction or to embrace a moral activism that requires us to work for justice and equality. Many of my ancestors were Mormon pioneers who risked everything to follow their faith and conscience. I honor them by following mine. I'm a Mormon, and I believe women should be ordained. Sorry. I'm also Ordain Women's answer to the question, isn't a call for ordination right now precipitous? Privately, I began considering the possibility of women's ordination in the late 1970s and talking about it more openly in the 1980s. Pivotal in the public discussion at this time were essays like Nadine Hansen's Women in Priesthood, which appeared in Dialogue in 1981, and Margaret Toscano's The Missing Rib, The Forgotten Place of Queens and Priestesses in the Establishment of Zion, which was given at Sunstone in 1984 and later published. My first public presentation referencing women and priesthood was at Sunstone in 1985 during a panel titled, Since Sonia, New Directions for Women in the Church. I suggested that if the church didn't grapple with feminist issues, including the ordination of women, a future Sunstone panel might be titled, Since Sonia, Divergent Directions for Women and the Church. By the time I wrote Power Hungry, an essay called Power Hungry in 2004 and published in Sunstone, and partially in Exponent 2, I'd been committed to the idea of women's ordination for over 2 decades. Last year, understandably frustrated by the lack of movement on this issue, I decided to make a concerted effort to mention women and priesthood ordination just about every time I commented on Mormon feminist blogs and Facebook groups or wrote guest blog posts. The idea of women's ordination had to enter the realm of the thinkable and the familiar before it could enter the realm of the possible. The women at Exponent 2 were kind enough to publish some of my guest blog posts on women's ordination and several other Mormon feminist blogs tolerated my incessant comments on the subject. Inspired by a Sunstone West presentation Caroline Klein put together featuring feminist women religious from a variety of faith traditions, and aching for cohesive, coordinated activism in the Mormon feminist community, I helped organize a Catholic Mormon dialogue on women's ordination at Claremont, which was later reprised at Sunstone West in Berkeley, and worked with the women who did the online response to Julie Beck's Mothers Who Know to prepare a document calling on church leaders to thoughtfully consider and earnestly pray about the question of women's ordination and the integration of women into the decision-making structure of the church. Like the women at WAVE, I believed that what we conceptualized and called for as Mormon feminists had to be clear and specific and actionable. How could we expect church leaders to respond to nebulous demands for a more equitable church? For me, interim steps like those detailed in the All Are Likened to God document and Women Praying in General Conference were very important, but the structural inequity in the church was such that anything less than ordination was not only insufficient, but at odds with what is most compelling in Mormonism. We'll hear from Kate now, and then Kaimi, then Hannah, and then it'll be a Q&A free-for-all.
Welcome everybody. I'm excited to see so many folks here today, and I'm excited to see so many people who have put their profiles up on the website here today. I know everyone hates this, but in church, but if you have a profile up on the website, if you could just stand up really quickly. It's already public, people, so. Thanks, everybody. And there's a few people in the room who also have profiles in queue, so yes. We've been working on putting those up among our many other duties. So if you're thinking about putting up a profile, please do, and we'll get those up as soon as we can. And by way of introduction, I also wanted to read my profile that's on the site. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a Mormon, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm an aunt, I'm an international human rights attorney, I'm a returned missionary and BYU grad, and I think Mormon women should have the priesthood. I grew up in Oregon, and I was baptized when I turned 8 years old. Growing up in Oregon was when I was one of very few Mormons at my school, and I always felt that being Mormon was something really special about me. I went to college at BYU and served a mission in Barcelona, Spain. I met my husband at BYU, where we were married in the Salt Lake City Temple. I recently graduated from law school and now work as an attorney with human rights defenders around the world. Mormonism is the house I live in. In a song called The House I Live In, civil rights leader and singer Paul Robeson describes what America is to him. The house I live in, the goodness everywhere, a land of wealth and beauty with enough for all to share. Mormonism is the house I live in, my childhood aspirations, the way I learned charity, my marriage, and the people I cherish most. My connection to God, my mission, my language, and the way I see the world. Mormonism is the house I live in. I'm an active member of the church, some may be surprised to hear. I'm currently serving as the Relief Society chorister, even though I do not know how to lead music. I just sort of wave my hands around. And I'm serving in that calling because I believe in the value of service and the power of God to make us more than we are on our own. I learned this power in a very unique and powerful way on my mission. As I taught other people about my beliefs, I learned from them, and I learned the value of authenticity. The way I live my faith is try to be my authentic self as much as I can, and to pray with my work and efforts that God will be able to use me to serve others. I think that we should be ordained because I have felt the power of the priesthood in my life. Others who give their lives to godly service and channel the power of God to bless and inspire me. To me, agitating on this issue is a question of self-respect. I respect and value the church and myself too much to be silent on the question. I truly believe that God wants us all to equally share both the burdens and the blessings of the priesthood. The ordination of women would put us on equal spiritual footing, and nothing less will suffice. I wanted to explain also a little bit today about why I decided that this was the particular cause that I would invest in, and why I tried to gather others around me to publicly support the ordination of women, and why I dragged in my family members and people who have been advocating for ordination for decades and total strangers to join with me and make this public stance. But first, to explain that, I want to explain a scientific theory. I'm an attorney. I'm not a scientist, so this will be a very simplified explanation. My husband is a scientist, so there's a theory in environmental science called peak oil, P-E-A-K. And peak oil simply describes that there is a finite amount of oil in the ground for us to get to power, to use for power. It's not infinite, it's not unending. And the peak of that oil has had, for the past 100 years, let's say, we've been increasingly using oil, and at a certain peak, whether we've reached it or we're reaching it in the future, that oil will rapidly decline. And that will happen faster because so many more people are using that power. The theory of peak oil simply illustrates that it's unsustainable, that it can't go on forever, and that that there will be a catalyst for rapid change and adaptation of different technologies. Now, the reason that I started Ordain Women is because I believe we've reached peak patriarchy. You can use that as a hashtag. So we've reached peak patriarchy, and it is unsustainable. We are losing precious resources of youth in the church, particularly women, particularly young women, and particularly single women. That is a precious resource, and the current method that we have of utilizing that resource is unsustainable. So what we need to do as a body of the church and as the institution is learn to adapt. We need to make a sustainable priority, and we need to rally those resources, those what I would call currently alternative resources, since we are currently underutilized in the church as women. My personal moment of peak patriarchy happened in January of 2013, also known as this year. And I reached a point in my life where I could no longer sustain the not being authentic in my life. And I said that is it. I have reached peak patriarchy. I can no longer support the system. It is unsustainable, and I need to tell other people that. So what I did in January, because I wasn't very tied into the Mormon blogosphere, is I just started cold calling people. I was researching people. I found people like Lori, who had been writing about ordination. I found others who I thought would be sympathetic, and I the old-fashioned cold calling. I got their phone numbers, and I called them and I said, "Hi, you don't know me. My name is Kate. I think women should be ordained, and we need to do something about it." The reason that I reached that moment is multifaceted, and we can talk about that if people are interested in the Q&A, because I want to give plenty of time for feedback. But the one thing that I will say is the day that we launched our website on March 17th, we were very afraid that, at least I was personally very afraid, I think Laura was also very afraid, that we wouldn't have a critical mass, that it would be these profiles and no one else would join us. And that has been, that fear has been totally refuted. We've had a wonderful response. We've had hundreds of supportive comments. We have over 100 profiles up on the website. And we've had what I would call, I would say I was pleasantly shocked at the response. That people are ready for this change, that women are ready to assert ourselves and to really do public action, put ourselves on the line, and announce publicly that we want the brethren to prayerfully consider the ordination of women. And I think that if we acknowledge that we have reached peak patriarchy and we look towards a sustainable future, we can integrate women and men, and we can really see this as a retention effort, which we do. I think that fully engaging women and fully engaging all people in the church is not only the best way forward for women, but is the best way forward for us as a body.
So, I was sitting at my house and minding my own business, and I got a call from the bishop asking me to speak.
So, what does it do when we visualize getting a call from the bishop asking me to speak? And what does it say about our images of how leadership is constructed, what the voice of God sounds like in the LDS context? I mean, that's the contribution I think that we're seeing here, right? So, I'm obviously I am a man. I was ordained a priesthood. It's typical LDS ritual, right? You're a 12-year-old kid. You get hands put on your head. You get told you now have a power that is amazing, that is greater than the power of kings. And you try to reconcile that with the fact that you're having wars with leftover sacrament water after you're supposed to finish it up. So it's a complicated narrative that you get, but it's something that as I look at what's happening with my sons and my daughter, and I say, like, why is it that she doesn't have the opportunity to go through that angsty moment of saying, wait a minute, am I committing a sin if I throw the holy water at another member of the deacon's quorum? If so, I guess I'm in trouble, and so are all of the members of pretty much every deacon's quorum that's ever existed. And what role does this play? I mean, because priesthood is, and one thing which we need to disentangle, and that's why I love this project, priesthood right now is multiple things, right? It has this ecclesiastical, theological function of we are sort of the authorized functionaries of God, and yet it also plays an incredibly important role in the construction of Mormon masculinity. And how do you know that you are a Mormon young man? Because you have the priesthood. So what happens if we take out that prong? I think a couple of things. First off, it means we have to think more about being servants of God. This is not just, wow, I have a Y chromosome, I have to be a servant of God. And instead, wow, this applies to everybody. And she can be a servant of God too. And so can the other girl in my beehive class or whatever. Suddenly it's not just a rubber stamping of all of the male kids. And then I think it teaches lessons going forward. It's such an arresting image. When those young men, and they're all sort of goofy teenagers, I mean, probably like I was and everybody else, but it's a powerful ritual to have these goofy teenage boys breaking the bread and passing the water and administering to the congregation. And I say, why do I want to deny that to women? Why do I want to deny that to my sisters? And the answer is I don't. And so, now we'll get in a second in Q&A to the incredibly insulting response, which is, well, if men didn't have the priesthood, they would just sit home and play Xbox all day. Which is, wow, do we really have that little confidence in Mormon men? Are we that bad as a group? And if so, why the hell do you want us to run the organization? Yeah, we'll elaborate more on that when we get to specific questions. But just as somebody who has the priesthood, and people say, how does this challenge or threaten your role in the priesthood? And I think it doesn't. It's fantastic. One of the coolest things that I found was looking at a lesson, and I'll kind of talk about this because she had much more interesting things to say. But I was looking at this lesson from the lesson manual from a couple of years ago, Sunday school, and it's about the chapter in the book of Acts where Paul says, hey, we're going to give the priesthood to Gentiles now. We're going to let it happen. And actually there are complicated questions about what exactly Paul meant by some of those things and so on, but setting those aside, I mean, the way it is framed in the LDS narrative is, this was this magical moment in which centuries of tradition were thrown out in order to expand the kingdom of God. And I'm like, why not? I mean, if you accept, and granted there are all sorts of problems with it, but if you accept the arc of priesthood history in LDS theology, it has been a constant story of expansion. It has been, wow, it started with a small set of specially tribally designated people, and now, wait, it's going to Gentile men, except for people who are African American. Oh, and now it's going to African Americans, and well, a constant story of expansion. And why on earth would we think that, of this arc, for 20 years now, we've had universal male priesthood suffrage as compared to some other subset of men being allowed. Why do we think this is the stopping point? Doesn't it make more sense that it just keeps going and we find a way to continue to grow the kingdom of God and make use of the talents of all of our wonderful sisters?
Hello. My name is Hannah Wheelwright, and I am a 20-year-old BYU student, as I was introduced. And I started a blog called Young Women Feminists. And just to finish up my introduction, I'm also going to read my profile. It says, hi, I'm Hannah. I'm a thinker, a daughter, a sister, a student, a believer in being anxiously engaged in the good cause, and I support the ordination of women. I was born in France, then lived in New Hampshire, California, and Virginia, spending my last 3 years of high school at an all-girls boarding school right down the road from Washington, D.C. I love reading about Mormon history, watching documentaries on Netflix, and baking. And I'm Mormon because I believe in the words taught by Jesus Christ, that we should love everyone, that we should serve without the thought of reward, and that we should forgive one another. I believe in the words of the Book of Mormon, that black and white, bond and free, male and female, all are like unto God. I believe in the community that we take part in as members of the LDS Church, in which we constantly seek to bear one another's burdens and improve ourselves through service and the atonement. I think that Mormon women should have the priesthood because in my Mormon women's history class at BYU, we read the original Relief Society minutes from its organizational meeting, courtesy of the Joseph Smith papers, and in the transcript of his remarks from March 30th, 1842, I read that Joseph said that the society should move according to the ancient priesthood, that he was going to make this society a kingdom of priests, as in Enoch's day, as in Paul's day. And when I read that original historical record of the words of the prophet of the Restoration, combined with the modern revelation of church leaders stating that the origins of the priesthood availability are not entirely clear, some explanations with respect to this matter were made in the absence of direct revelation, and references to these explanations are sometimes cited in publications. These previous statements do not represent church doctrine. It makes sense to me that women should be ordained. So, just to be super blunt, that was way more timid than I actually feel about the question of women's ordination. I was very careful when putting together my profile for Ordain Women because as a BYU student, a church employee, and a member of a church that has excommunicated people for speaking about these things, I was understandably hesitant about being too bold in my assertion of my beliefs. But I don't think I would do that now. And in fact, I actually do intend to edit my profile and to update it to better reflect how I really feel about this topic. But I can also understand why I was so scared at times, as I mentioned. And my participation with Ordain Women at the very beginning has always been fraught with these questions of how much I'm willing to put on the line. For me, there's a big difference between simply putting up my profile and agreeing to be a spokesperson for Ordain Women. Because putting up a profile gave me the opportunity to say exactly what I wanted to say, and I could make sure that if I ever got called in by BYU or my work or by my ecclesiastical leader, that I could respond to exactly what was in my profile. But it's different to be a spokesperson that takes on different obligations and shows different responsibilities, I guess. But the day that Kate asked me was a Sunday. Back, it must have been in March, I think it was before the website launched, and I remember I had been very involved from the very beginning, from right when Kate first called me, and we didn't even really know what we were doing or who was going to be involved, but I had been in on all of those long conference calls. I don't know if anyone else remembers those, that still happen and are long. But I remember that Sunday I went to church and I was sitting there alone, and I was really thinking deeply, and I was praying about this question of whether or not I should take this step to be more visible and to show how involved I had been in the organization of Ordain Women. And I was sitting there in sacrament meeting, and I was listening to the talks, and I was feeling so afraid. And everything I was thinking about was analyzing, okay, what would happen if they kicked me out of BYU? Where would I go? How would I transfer? How much debt would I get? What would I do if I lost my job? Where would I get another job? If I got kicked out of church, how would that damage my family relationships? And I was trying to think through these risks that I was thinking about taking. And all of a sudden, I realized that I was tired of being afraid. And I was tired of worrying that a belief in a loving and inclusive God and a loving, inclusive church structure could make me a sinner. And I was tired of being ashamed to express these desires in my heart that I felt were completely normal and valid and what everyone wants. And I realized that if I was going to be honest with myself and if I was going to make sure that my participation in this religious community was authentic and that it was speaking up for what was important to me, that I would have to go along with what I felt was right, and that was to be a spokesperson. And so it was a combination of this sense of this desire for authenticity within myself, but as I pondered, and again sitting there in sacrament meeting, and then it went on to Sunday school, and I pulled out my phone and I responded to Kate, and I told her that I would be a spokesperson. And I started to realize that I, combined with this desire for a sense of authenticity, I also felt a personal call to be one of the people that sticks their necks out. Because while we have this history in our church of persecution of the intellectual community, of some thought policing that sometimes goes on among in different areas and by different people, I realized that we'll never know how honest we can be about our opinions and how forthright we can be about what we believe in until some people stick their necks out. And I realized that I had a unique position of having my life so interwoven with Mormon life, living in the heartland of Mormondom. And I realized that I had this unique position to put everything that I had on the line to take that risk and to see what would happen. And while I'm not trying to portray myself as a martyr or anything like that, and for the record, I have not received any discipline whatsoever. I've never been called in by my bishop or employers or BYU. I have received zero pushback at all, except for from my family, but that's understandable. That's a different topic. But what I realized was that I did feel this responsibility, and as I agreed to be a spokesperson and started doing TV interviews and things like that, and being more open about what I believed in, it has brought me more comfort than I can imagine to be my authentic self. And I have become somewhat possessed by this desire to shake every progressive Mormon I meet and to say, why aren't you being louder? Why aren't we raising our voices more together? We have been talking about these issues for decades, and not to say that no one is speaking up or that anybody's actions or anyone is doing it wrong, but I've been possessed by this desire to encourage those who believe in these things, whether or not you agree with Ordain Women or agree with women's ordination, but encouraging everyone to be more authentic and to speak up in whatever way that you are able to. Because until we do start speaking up, we're never going to know how many other people agree with us, and we're never going to be able to give that support to the people that are speaking up and are receiving some kind of pushback in whatever community they may be receiving it. And so that is my personal call today, is that while I agree with Ordain Women and I fully support it, I hope that in whatever you believe in, that you will speak up more and that you will find the people that are looking for the support, because there are too many women that have left the church over feeling unequal, and there's too many people that have left the church over its exclusive practices. And if we are going to be agents, as has been emphasized here today, and it's our responsibility to speak up. Thank you.
Time for Q&A. So if you'd like to maybe come up to the microphone so that you can be recorded, and we're also live streaming, so please come up, and while you're coming up, just go ahead. Don't have to raise your hand. You can either stand in line here. But while you're coming up, I'm going to read one of the most profound questions we got on the internet. It is from Brian in Virginia. He says, If women were ordained to the priesthood, would high priests be more likely to stay awake in quorum meetings?
There's a microphone right at the
I was just being silly. Unless somebody thinks that.
I just, well, I kind of wanted to face that way, actually.
Well, just turn the mic around.
Well, first I'd like to thank you especially and all of you for creating such an organization. It's very inspiring to me, and I'm sure to many women and members of the church. I kind of feel like I'm in fast and testimony meeting. Speaking of that, I kind of felt like I wanted to bear a testimony that I wouldn't be able to bear in church. That is that I know that Heavenly Father loves his daughters as much as he loves his sons. And for many years I struggled with that, and I didn't know. And I do know that now. And I know that Heavenly Father wants his daughters, wants us to progress to our full divine potential, and that he wants us to have the priesthood. I feel that to be true in my heart, and I have for many years. And I feel that Christ wants the same. And I do feel in my heart that Joseph Smith he intended the Relief Society to be an organization of priestesses, and unfortunately he was killed before that could happen. And if he were alive today, I think that he would probably be very supportive of this. And I would also like to bear my testimony that I know that Heavenly Mother lives too, and that she loves us. And I know that Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother love each other very deeply. It breaks my heart that I have to make such a separation between them, that I can talk about the sacred feminine in other contexts, but I can't talk about her inside the church, when that should be the most natural thing in the world. That's all I wish to say. And my name is Rachel Bulla, by the way, and I live here in Salt Lake City. I haven't put up a profile yet, but I will soon. So I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I want to speak up on behalf of the high priest. Every Sunday in my ward, I go by the high priest classroom, and there are some of the coolest guys in there, and I just know in my heart that their discussions are a lot better than the ones in Relief Society, and I just wish I could just slip in and be with them. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. I was there when Margaret Toscano did the missing rib paper in Sunstone in 1984. It completely electrified the place. Afterwards, there was another panel discussion on what would happen if women got the priesthood. And one of the examples that I remember thoroughly is that the minute women get something that men have, that thing becomes devalued. The example they used was, if women weave baskets, they are kitchen articles. If men weave baskets, they are works of art. So if women start weaving baskets, then suddenly another form of barrier will be erected. And what we thought we had is not as good as what we thought it would be. So, through the years, I played with the idea, men have the Melchizedek priesthood, women take over the Aaronic priesthood, one thing or another. But through the years, I'm like Lori, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I really think it's time for us to slip into the high priest classroom. I think it's time for us to be high priests. I think it's time for us to be elders. I think it's time for us to be all of those things. I don't think any other division is really going to be satisfying at this point. So, if I have a question for the panel, it's basically, have you given any thought to the structure, if this were actually to happen, to the structure, how it would work?
A number of questions that we got online had to do with, I guess we should introduce the idea of priesthood versus priestesshood, because there are those who advocate sort of in my mind, what I would call a separate but equal organization, a complementarian well, not even that. I mean, I guess that eventually comes in, but there are a lot of ideas thrown out in terms of on the non-priesthood level, the complementarian view, which is women have separate roles. Women are mothers in the priesthood, which Sonia Farnsworth masterfully debunked 20 years ago. And then all the way to, in the middle ground would be those who advocate for priestesshood and those who advocate for a separate priestesshood and priesthood. To those of us who advocate for priesthood for all, who see priesthood as non-gendered. And one thing that a number of people have pointed out is that priesthood has become so associated in Mormonism with maleness that to ask a normal Mormon woman if she wants a priesthood is like asking her if she wants to be a man. So I think that's one of the barriers to even being able to envision what a structure could be like if we all shared power in those.
I think this question has come up a lot online, and I just want to say that we're a very large group. It's not just me and Lori and Hannah and Kaimi anymore. So there's a wide range of opinion among profile holders of Ordain Women, what the actual logistics of it would look like. For me personally, I'm just going to answer for what I say. Separate but equal has been historically proven to be not equal. And I do not believe that there should be a separate, I believe that priesthood should not be associated with gender, and that women should serve in all offices of the church and should have equal access to all leadership positions.
I just wanted to say that Vicki said most of what I wanted to say, but better than I would have said it. But I also look forward to having matriarchs as well as patriarchs. That would be wonderful. But my question is, I used to clerk for a judge, and it was always great when we get this brief in, and the brief would lay out all of the arguments that the judge could make, and really all I had to do as the clerk was just, rubber stamp that and say, boom, we're done. So to what extent, in order to help these people reach the conclusion that women should receive the priesthood, does your organization feel the need to, A, figure out what the priesthood actually is, since Joanna Brooks has recently concluded that we don't know, and B, kind of answer, like, what will this look like connect all the dots for these people so that they can say, well, my God, here it is. How much of that is part of your work as opposed to simply advocating for conclusion?
Let's take maybe a couple more questions and then we can answer them all.
A couple aspects to my questions. Are you familiar with the Tom Phillips interview on Second Endowment? I think that is fascinating what his wife did. I think for me, as I listen, I support and understand and agree with what we're trying to do. My question though would be, what would it be like if, in fact, tomorrow morning you wake up and women now can be ordained to the priesthood? Because the church is the way that it is, my understanding is that there are millions of us men who have been disenfranchised as far as priesthood power with the institution. Doesn't make any difference what our ideas are, they're not going to listen. Do you think that women of your caliber and thinking abilities would hold high priesthood positions within the institution? Or would the institution make sure that it had women in its power slots, but women who agreed with the agenda of the male priesthood organization? Because as I see it, it's very addictive in nature, and its power and control is not going to be easily. And even if women were ordained, I don't see things changing that much on an institutional level, although on a personal family one, big time.
Okay, so we have two questions out there right now. Then we have the question about
Connecting the dots.
yeah, connecting the dots.
Two comments. One, if we don't know what the priesthood is, why are we using it? I mean, if all of a sudden it's like, oh, women want the priesthood, oh wait, we don't know what priesthood even means. Is it this? Is it that? And it's like, if men about the priesthood, why wasn't this a question we were asking a long time ago? And if it's a barrier to women having the priesthood, that we don't know what the priesthood is, then shouldn't everyone stop using the priesthood until we get this figured out? It seems like a pretty foundational thing. I'm of the opinion that we know enough about what priesthood is. I think that it's weird that we say like, oh, we don't have all the answers, but let's go off faith of what we do know, except for the priesthood, in which case we have to know every detail of what exactly it would look like if women were ordained before we can go forward with it. I think that a lot of it, for me personally, it would look exactly like it is for the men. I don't think there's any difference. I think that as far as connecting the dots, I think that's something that is going to be a long process for ordained women to attempt to do, to help try to do that for the body of the church as well as the leaders, and trying to find different ways. I don't think there's a silver bullet where we can type up like the exact Sunstone presentation that is going to connect the dots for everyone and get females ordained in the church. But I think that it'll be a process.
I'm going to be perfectly honest, because we're at Sunstone and because I'm trying to live an authentic life. I think that saying that the reason women don't have the priesthood, or a reason why women shouldn't have the priesthood, is because we don't know what the priesthood is cowardly. I think we know enough about the priesthood, like Hannah said, that women could participate. I think we know that it is the power of God. And this leads into a corollary question, which a lot of women have said or asked, is I feel overwhelmed, I don't want additional burdens of the priesthood, I don't want to have, I don't want to be a high priest because I have so many challenges already, I have so many assigned tasks. But I believe in the priesthood. I am a true believing Mormon, and I believe that the priesthood is the power of God. When I talk to men who have the priesthood, who I admire, like my father, like my husband, the priesthood is a transformative power that will help us to complete our duties and our tasks as assigned, and that we will be able to share the burdens of the priesthood. So do I think we need to go through a logical diagram of what will happen? Do we need to say if this then this, if this then this, if this then this? Do we do that for anything else? No. Someone had a comment about that the website was too woman. Whatever that means. And then too feminine. He was saying it's just a bunch of touchy-feely pictures with you wanting us to feel sorry for you and feel that you should have the priesthood. And I was like, are you familiar with Mormonism? The way that we decide to join the church is not going through a logical corollary chart to reach the logical conclusion that Mormonism is true, otherwise we would not have any members. The way that we decide Mormonism is true is we feel in our hearts that we should be members of the church. We feel in our hearts that the Book of Mormon is true. I feel in my heart that I want to be ordained to the priesthood, and I believe in the power of the priesthood.
About say a huge portion, 30% of the questions or something that we got were these logistical questions. Like, well, then who would be in what quorum and how would we organize meetings? And I'm like, are you kidding? Like, do you know how many times priesthood organization has changed in church history? Like, oh, we've got a first elder and a second elder, never mind, we're going to tear up that one. Now I've got a quorum of the 12, we have 70s, oh, they're doing different things, now we're abolishing 70s as a state level office. I mean, we have changed, you know, we have meetings on different days, never mind, now we lump them all together. Basically, the entire history of the LDS Church has been a history of changing the logistics. So to say, well, we might have to change the logistics seems pretextual. Like, okay, come on guys, say it like it really is. You just don't want to have women in charge. Because if logistics are the issue, then we clearly have the ability to figure it out.
I just basically wanted to ask, besides giving you guys some profiles and everything else, is there anything else we can do to support the Ordain Women movement?
Are you going to say anything about the event coming up in Washington, D.C., for instance?
Yes.
Okay. Lori's got a question from online that's kind of related to that. So
yeah, our mission statement clearly states that we're activists, and so a number of questions have come up regarding what do you mean by activism, right? And I personally have done it, as Kate and everybody well knows, you know, I struggle with the issue of what's appropriate political versus religious action. Because we want to see our actions as faith affirming. And so we've struggled to come to, we've asked, I mean, I've probably asked half the people in this room privately that question. So I guess I'd like you to know that we struggle with that question, I think. And so one of the, there are two actions coming up, and so this is probably an appropriate time to announce them. So I will announce the first. If I can find my notes on it. We have a nationwide action coming up in August, in fact, on Women's Equality Day, August 26th. It's called Equal in Faith. And I'll just read to you the material from our Facebook event page. Women from several religious traditions will mark National Women's Equality Day on Monday, August 26th by joining together in a nationwide fast for gender justice and the equitable inclusion of women in their religious communities. While women serve as priests and increasingly are called to positions of religious and ritual authority in many traditions, they are denied ordination to the priesthood and a full range of opportunities for service and spiritual participation in the Roman Catholic Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and many Jewish, Muslim, and evangelical congregations. Since fasting and prayer are spiritual practices common to most religious communities, we hope such interfaith events will underscore our belief in the ability of religion to liberate rather than subjugate, and the need for a more equitable distribution of religious authority in our traditions. The day-long fast will culminate in an interfaith prayer service from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., a congregation noted for its long-standing support of civil and religious equality. All are welcome. Those who cannot attend the service in Washington, D.C. Are encouraged to join us by fasting on August 26th and posting a personal statement of support on the Equal in Faith Facebook event page. This will sound familiar to LDS people. We also encourage participants to donate money they would have spent on food to an organization of their choice that supports gender equity in religion. Equal in Faith is co-sponsored by Ordain Women and the Roman Catholic Women's Ordination Conference. Together we believe that gender equality shouldn't stop at the doors of our churches, synagogues, or mosques.
So Salt Lake event. Oh,
and there's going to be a companion, we just decided recently that there's going to be a companion event on August 26th in Salt Lake, and so check the Ordain Women page for more details on that. But we encourage everyone to fast along with us, even if you're on the fence about the issue of women's ordination. The fast is an interfaith fast, so it's for the equitable treatment of women in all faith traditions. And obviously our slant is that we are fasting for women to be ordained. So please join us on the 26th and tell other people about it. We believe that fasting is an action, that it can bring change. The second action that we're preparing for is perhaps more controversial. And it's going to be happening on October 5th in Salt Lake City. We're going to be meeting as a group at City Creek Park, which is a block and a half east of the conference center. And we're going to be meeting as a group of women and marching to the conference center and attempting to attend the priesthood session of General Conference. And we're also inviting male allies to accompany us. We're going to be dressing in church dress as you would attend any other conference session, and we encourage male allies to also attend with us and go into the conference center. We hope and pray that we will be permitted to enter the conference center and attend the session of the general session of conference that should be open to all members of the church. If we are denied entrance, the male allies will go and attend the session of conference, and we will be left on the outside, and we'll have a press conference. So we need a lot of support to be able to rally for this action. We want to get the message to the leadership of the church that we want full participation in our organization. And so we need you to help us, and we need you to come, and we need you to spread the word. If this action seems scary to you, as it does to me, then please consider attending. The larger the group, the more secure and confident we will feel, and the louder the voice will be that women should be included in every level and in every session of General Conference. And just a little bit more about the motivation for the priesthood sessions, action, the inspiration. President Monson's wife recently passed away. I don't know if anyone saw her obituary, but as part of her obituary, she described the first time that he spoke in the tabernacle during the priesthood session. And she wanted so badly to attend, and she wanted so badly to hear him speak. And she wasn't permitted to enter, and so she had to stand on the outside and listen to her own husband give a talk in the priesthood session. And so, while I don't think that was the intention of including that in the obituary, I think that we want to highlight that women should be included.
And if you're wondering whether you should come to this, and two questions that we've gotten, which are sort of the flip side. Number one, can I support this movement if I'm a faithful church member? Or number two, can I support this movement if I am a non-member? And the answer is yes and yes. And so, I mean, if you are a faithful church member, is this outside of the pale? Is this apostasy? And I think when we see President Hinckley asked about women in the priesthood, and he says, well, they haven't really asked for it, that implies that, well, maybe they should start asking for it. And on the flip side, if you're not a member of the community, if you're not a member of record on the church, but you still think that it's important for women to be included in the decision-making structures of this community, then by all means, well, come and attend. We'd love to have you there.
So I have a question about criticism, because I find that criticism shows you not only the extremes, but you can also see different tones and different themes that come out of it. So my question for you is twofold. What is the most helpful criticism that you've received, and what is the most hurtful criticism that you've received over this movement?
I'll let Hannah answer that since she's gotten a lot of criticism.
Yes, I have gotten a lot of criticism. Okay. No.
Can you hear me? No? Yes?
Okay.
Now there's so much suspense for my comments. So I would say the most helpful criticism I've gotten was some women who told me that they felt like Ordained Women was acting as if we were on a higher intellectual plane and we're talking down to the women of the church and saying, you know, you should want the priesthood, you should do these things, you don't understand the priesthood, you don't understand the gospel. If you understood, you would be asking for the priesthood like us. And I think that that is helpful because I think that it is easy at any time when you're trying to get somebody to understand your point of view or to understand your argument, it is easy to come off as saying, well, I am intellectually superior, and if you were smart enough to understand my arguments, then you would agree with me. You know? And I think that that's a very valid criticism of any movement that is, you know, that is advocating for social justice or advocating for things to be changed. But my response would be that it is very understandable when the LDS Church does provide a script for women. It says if you are faithful and virtuous and modest, and if you get married and you have children, you get married in the temple, and you live your life and endure to the end, then you are going to be a successful actress in that script. And when Ordained Women comes in and says, you don't just have to play that role, you could play these roles too. It's very easy for women who have been trying to play that one role the church provides and feel that, and maybe some of them feel that they've been very successful at it. It's easy to feel like Ordained Women is telling you that you are doing things wrong or that you're bad or whatever. But Ordained Women is saying simply, you don't just have to play that role, that gender role. You can play any role that anybody in the church can play. You don't have to be limited to that. So while I really appreciate that criticism, because I think it's very important for us to not seem like we are talking down to people or telling them that they're living the church wrong. But that would be my response. And then the least helpful response, I think that the least helpful criticism is when people say, well, actually, no, I'm torn. I think it's very, I'll just list off. It's very unhelpful when people say, that's never going to happen, so let's not even talk about it. It's very unhelpful to me when people say, we need to focus on these practices. Why are you asking for the priesthood if that's never going to happen? Because in my opinion, the question of women's ordination is so intricately tied into all these other questions and all the other things that are wrong in the church, in my opinion, all the other ways that women are unequal. But addressing this question puts the highlight fundamentally on women's equality and women's voices and how women are not even included at the table to discuss all those other practices and harmful doctrines and things. And so we don't start here. So I would say there's that, and then the other most unhelpful criticism is when people pull me aside and they say, so you want the priesthood, right? And yeah, and it's that assumption that I'm power hungry and that I have just been jealous of, you know, it's penis envy, you know, and these sort of things. And I think that it's showing this fundamental understanding of the priesthood that it's not that, you know, all of a sudden when a woman wants it, it's this like power, authority thing, instead of the ability to act in the name of God and the ability to perform service for people. So that would be my response.
A related question that we've gotten a lot online is what has been the feedback or pushback that people have gotten, and that was a lot of questions. So I wanted actually to ask Deborah Jensen if she could share a little bit about her experience. While no one has been formally disciplined, but there have been some real impacts for people who have participated.
Okay. That was a lot easier until you actually have to do it. I put my profile up pretty early, and I was a member of my Word Relief Society presidency, and had always been my word's crazy feminist, but I was theirs, and they loved me. And I went into my bishop, read him my profile, said, I'm a part of this. I don't believe that I've done anything wrong, but I want to give you the chance if you feel like you need to release me. I understand that this puts you in a difficult position, and he assured me that that would not be the case. And then a week later, in the 5th Sunday combined meeting, he spent 20 minutes discussing the woman in our ward who had expressed the desire to have the priesthood and compared her to Martin Harris and placed her under condemnation. Probably the most hurtful part was when he declared that she was too focused on the ways of the world and obviously was not supporting her husband in his priesthood duties, nor fulfilling her duties as a wife and mother. I very calmly waited for him to finish, and then I left. And sobbed all through gospel doctrine, which if you're a liberal Mormon is not uncommon. And then I went right back into sacrament meeting and made him look at me for the rest of the hour, 10 minutes. I visited my state president a week later, and he assured me that I did not need to be released and that my bishop owed me an apology. And within 3 weeks, I had found out through text message that I was being released, and so were the other 3 women who were in the presidency with me. And I'm the only one that has returned to our ward. So these other 3 women who were just caught in the crossfire, one has moved her records, one has just stopped coming. It's been difficult, but I will do it again, and I will be standing in line with my husband and my son, and I'm not going to stop because I cannot look my daughters in the eye. And guess what? In March, my son turns 16, and they're going to have to ordain him a priest with me sitting in the room.
I'm a member of Community Christ, and I was a member of a feminist group in the 1970s. And we were accused of wanting only to be focused on priesthood for women. They're actually, it was called AWARE, and it was an acronym for it that stood for something. And that's been 40 years. But there were a whole lot of other things which Hannah spoke to and Michael spoke to about the power. But one of the questions for us was whether or not some of the women did not want priesthood because it would divide the women into the haves and the have-nots. Now we don't we have a continued very strong women's department in the church. It's been blended into other things. But I'm wondering, and we're all in a different place now, but I'm wondering if you have thought about the way that we did 40 years ago. Will this divide women? And some of the women turned down the priesthood for they thought that it would create this division among the powerful women's ministries. So I don't know if you have considered that.
So, I think it's a great question. It relates to the earlier one, too, about co-optation. I mean, bringing women into the priesthood does not mean an end to hierarchy, does not mean an end to asymmetric relationships in some communities. It does mean that we're removing one piece of structural inequality that is a really, really big one. So this is not going to make the world perfect, but it is going to make the world a lot better.
Yeah, I've often, I think in my Power Hungry piece, I talked about the fact that a lot of women are leery of priesthood because they see it as abusive. They see power as abusive. But, my response is always, well, having power within an institution. If you're going to be part of an institution, having power within an institution is preferable to institutional powerlessness. Because only if you have power within an institution can you affect change. Well, maybe that isn't true. I have to think about that. But it's easier to affect change if you're part of the institution. And as I've also said many times before, if you can bring the experience, the tempering experience of being on the margins to the center of the religious community, then perhaps you can have a transformative effect on the institution.
Hi, just had a few questions. This is the first time I've been introduced to this movement, just when I walked in the door, and I think it's pretty cool. I love the passion, and the stories are touching. And forgive me, since I'm not familiar with this, I'm sure this topic has already been discussed, and everyone else is familiar with it, perhaps. But, how do you compare and contrast the idea of blacks in the priesthood with this, and how, does that sort of dim your your motivation in some cases as to how long it took the Latter-day Saints to figure it out, despite the very clear and even concise statements of Scripture, such as God is not a respecter of persons. I mean, how do you compare and contrast that? And also, do you feel that it's going to require your movement in some people's mind, a pretended revelation, such as the one in 78? Yeah, that's about it.
I think we probably all have ideas on this particular topic, and it comes up a lot. And so I think it's really good to address it, and I don't think it's been overcovered at all. I think there are many parallels to the issue of the 1978 revelation that all worthy men can receive the priesthood, and then I think there are many differences. I think in some ways, like we've talked about before, we can see the expansion of the priesthood in the Mormon Church and in Christianity, and we see the Ordain Women movement as a further expansion of that priesthood. I think we do definitely believe in revelation, and that this would have to come by revelation. And that we specifically ask the brethren to prayerfully consider the ordination of women, because we understand the power structure of the church and we understand how revelation currently operates. I would also say that one of the ways in which it is different is that, from my understanding of the way that the 1978 revelation occurred, was that there was a lot of outside pressure, not necessarily a movement of members or a movement of black members within the church advocating for the ordination of priesthood, although I'm sure that happened, but not as publicly. There was outside pressure. There were groups such as, there were basketball, the Wyoming Six, I believe it was, who wouldn't play BYU because of their racist practices. There were temples, there were a lot of logistical issues because there were temples being built in Brazil, and it was difficult to determine who, in this, what I would call racist paradigm, who was eligible for the priesthood and who wasn't. So there were a lot of outside factors which our movement doesn't benefit from currently. In a lot of ways. So I think that the idea of gender segregation in any religious institution is becoming less and less popular, but there are still large institutions, for example, the Roman Catholic Church, who does not ordain women currently. So I think in some ways we can build solidarity with those other movements, but there isn't a huge, massive amount of pressure. In 1978, racism was generally considered to be wrong. And we were way behind the times, but I think in some ways sexism is not generally considered to be wrong.
So I'll just say a couple things quickly. First off, when you look at the explanations, it highlights the artificiality of it all, right? I mean, why do men have to have the priesthood and not women? Because women are more naturally spiritual. Go back to pre-1978. Why do blacks not get the priesthood? Because they're not spiritual enough. So it's like, the answer is always white men are in charge. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretext there. The other thing, I mean, it's a cautionary tale in a sense, because, okay, we are 40 years after 1978, and yet, how many black members of the Quorum of the 12 are there? How many black prophets have we had? How many black stake presidents do you know? Despite the formal equality, we still have significant barriers, and actually Lori's other project focuses on Wikipedia, and in Wikipedia, at least in theory, women can participate, but they don't because of these cultural barriers. So this is step one in an ongoing project, which is going to be dismantling all of the ways in which women are marginalized in the community.
Also, in terms of, I guess we do have to address the revelation issue, because it comes up constantly online in terms of the questions. And my simple, I guess, response to that is that, the idea of that the heavens are not open is a profound and compelling notion in Mormonism. But I think we believe that members play a part in that process, and a very important part in that process, and that is we articulate the need for it.
We obviously love your question because we're all wanting to answer every single part, but you also asked if it was, discouraging that it took so long for that revelation to come. And I think, clearly that is discouraging, but I think one thing that's encouraging is, again, what I talked about at the beginning, the peak patriarchy theory. I think things are accelerated. Once you've reached a peak, the changes are going to be extremely accelerated, and I think we've seen that in a lot of other movements, and I think we've seen a lot of agitation picking up in the Mormon Church, and fairly quick responses from the church, historically speaking. So I do think that this is accelerated. We don't have a timeline because we operate on what we believe the timeline of the Lord. But I see this as an accelerated process, and I hope and pray that it is.
Okay. Which one of us knows fully what love is? Or which one of us knows fully what truth is? And yet, you do, Katie. And yet, to seek for those things and to try to understand them, try to embody them and act them out, transforms us and enhances our understanding. And I agree with what you said. I mean, to use the argument that we don't know fully what priesthood is really, it's both cowardly and it's really it's a sidestepping. And for me, in fact, one of the exciting things about ordaining women, and I believe that they should be ordained to all the offices, deacon, priest, elder, apostle, everything, offices and callings, is that it would give us a chance to rethink our organization and do the kind of thing that you said, Kami, which is that there have been lots of structural changes. And for example, I'm very disturbed right now that obviously the issue that even though black men of African descent can now have priesthood, there's a glass ceiling. We don't see them in leadership. And of course, single people are definitely in this, that you cannot, if you're a single man who's never been married, you cannot be in certain offices or callings. You have to have a wife that dies to be single, right, if you're going to be okay. And probably then there's pressure to remarry. But, so I'm just going to put out a proposal. One way I think that even though I think single people are very discriminated in the church, because I'm worried about the glass ceiling thing with women, I would like to have the change that as soon as we ordain women, every wife of every church leader immediately holds the same office as their husband. And they have to vote secretly by secret ballot. They can't vote as a couple. They have to vote separately. And let's see how things would change then if we have all of those silent, faceless, generals, authorities' wives who suddenly have a responsibility. That's my proposal.
I think we need an extra strong round of applause for Margaret and all of her. Reasonable minds can disagree about whether all men and women should hold the same callings, but I do think she highlights an important point, which is the ordination of women, and Kaimi mentioned too, that the ordination of women is just the first step. That we don't think that ordaining women would eliminate all gender inequity in the church. Clearly that hasn't been the case for black members of the church. And clearly that wouldn't be the case for women. So the ordination of women is an initial step in full inclusion and full gender equity in the church.
Margaret, I think that would be a terrible idea. It's an interesting thought experiment. Obviously, what we're after, and just to put a sort of serious spin on that, what we're after is that individual, the use of individual talents and abilities, and making use of that, and not marginalizing half of our population, such that those talents and abilities are recognized.
So I served my mission in South America, and there's the whole machismo thing, and we can't get any of our men to be baptized, but isn't it great, because when you do come to church, you have the priesthood, and so there's this argument that I've heard that, it's great that they're ordained, because that gives them something to look forward to coming to church. I just got back from my in-laws. They are presiding over a mission in Africa, And men there in their mission are being baptized unofficial counts by my father-in-law at a rate of 8 to 10 to 1. So they're getting substantially more men in their new converts than they are women. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm reading Half the Sky. I think it would be fantastic for both cultures to experience having women empowered globally. I'm wondering what your, I don't know, like what your response is on an international, you know, more than just in our church structure, how it would affect global issues, how it would, I don't know, what the pushback might be from both cultures, you know, if the men suddenly don't have anything to come to church for anymore, I don't know, just back and forth on an international, not Utah-centric level.
I think that that's a very common question that we get. I have a two-part answer to that. First, I think that I served a mission in Barcelona, Spain, and it was the opposite in most of the congregations that I participated in Spain, where there were maybe 1 or 2 or 3 Melchizedek priesthood holders in a full congregation who were able to fulfill the leadership responsibilities in the congregation, but dozens of women who could have filled those roles. And so I think in depending on the area, I think that the inclusion of women in the leadership structure of the church could be a huge boon for a huge blessing for those congregations, and would really help spread the leadership, the participation in the leadership of the church, and that would be a huge blessing, at least in Spain, where I served my mission. And secondly, I think that it's really fabulous that you pointed out the international and outside of our community implications, because I honestly think that all people should be engaged in this issue of equality in all faith traditions, even if they are atheists, even if they're agnostics, even if they don't believe in, you know, any sort of spirituality. I think that it is crucial for the advancement of women in society, for women to be treated as equals within their faith tradition, whether that's Mormonism, whether that's Islam, whether that is Buddhism, whether that is Roman Catholicism. So I think that the ordination of women, but think about how things could change in Utah if women were treated as equals in the Mormon church. There is a huge wage gap in Utah between men and women. There is a huge leadership gap at the Utah State Legislature, where I did an internship. There are all kinds of inequities that exist in our society that can't be only directly contributed to the Mormon church, clearly, but I think that our faith institutions could play a huge part in increasing the social equity between men and women, not only in the church, but for all Utahns, for all Americans, for all people in all countries.
And really briefly, I just wanted to say that I have also run Half the Sky, and I feel very passionate about the way that religion exists worldwide, and the women's relationship to religion and women's relationship with deity. And I think that there is something incredibly important about helping to alleviate this crushing anguish that women around the world feel, that maybe their God doesn't think that they are equal. That was how I had my Northern Feminist Awakening, was asking that sincere question about whether or not God thought that I was a second-class citizen, that maybe I was really important, and maybe it would be awesome if I could make some babies, but maybe I was really just going to be second class to men in the eternities. And because of my Mormon upbringing, when I asked that question, I didn't even consider that maybe it was wrong. I was just like, oh, maybe that's how it is. And I think that a lot of women around the world feel very limited without necessarily having the words to articulate that. And I think it's really important to promote this cause of gender justice in religions, to help women to realize that that they don't have to be limited by this belief in a sexist God.
We are just about out of time. Do you want to do 2 quick questions or a comment?
I'll try to be brief, but I do have something to say. My name is Janice Allred. I have believed since the early 80s in the full ordination for women. I've spoken and written about it a number of times, and you can come and hear me give theological, reasonable reasons for this on Saturday. I'll be doing that again. What I would like to do here is just give you 2 as briefly as possible, 2 personal experiences that were important to me in finding my own desire for priesthood and desiring that for other women as well. The first experience that I'll tell you is hearing my sister, Margaret Toscano, give her speech, The Missing Rib, at Sunstone. I was there in the audience, and I will tell you what I experienced. As I heard Margaret give her well-reasoned arguments, it seemed to me, it just did not seem to me, it was. The roof of the building was gone, and light and power and beauty came down upon us, and I knew that priesthood for women was not only something that I could desire, something I should desire. It was righteous. It's part of what God desires for all of his children. The other experience actually happened before that. It was very significant for me, but it took me a while to figure out what it meant. I found my 2-year-old daughter floating on the top of the water in a swimming pool. She was blue. She was not breathing. She had no pulse. There were other people there. I grabbed her. I must have screamed. I don't know. Other people were there. My sister was there. No, Margaret, a different sister. She came over. She started giving her CPR, mouth-to-mouth, whatever it was. They called the paramedics. I watched and I prayed. Dear God, please. As I was praying, the Spirit said to me, use your priesthood. Now, I had been endowed in the temple. I listened carefully to what they say. I did believe that the temple endowment bestows priesthood. I knew stories of women who had given blessings. But this was a very hard thing to do. There were people around. There were paramedics there. I was afraid. The Spirit said to me again, use your priesthood. And so I did. I put my hands on her head. I did not have the courage to speak out loud, but I did say the words, by the power of the priesthood, I bless you. I started to say it again. She gasped, she threw up a lot of water, and then she started to scream. Well, I do not know what would have happened to this little child if I had not done that, but I do know what happened when I didn't. And I reflected on this. Despite my beliefs, it was very, very hard for me to do that. And I think, yes, the power of the priesthood comes directly from God. The church does not control it. But the rights of the priesthood, the church does control. The rights of the priesthood are the structures, the covenants, the offices, the callings, those things that we use to work together to do the work of God. And it's not right for women only to have the spirit and not the body. We need both parts. We need to be able to function fully in all ways in the church, in all callings. So those are my experiences that helped to prepare my heart to think clearly about this. And thank you.
Come on, Mom.
Kate's mom's here, so we're going to...
Yes, we're very short because we're out of time.
Oh my gosh.
Kate's mom has a name, Donna.
It's really unfair to follow that. That was very powerful, thank you. When I put up my profile for Ordain Women, I expected a certain reaction to that. But what surprised me the most was the reaction of women. My bishop was kind and loving. My priesthood leaders that knew about it have been very supportive and kind and loving, but it's the women who have reacted very strongly and unapprovingly of the fact that we're even asking the question. To me, I am here because I love the church. I love the gospel. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm doing this. The church needs to do this. The church, to be a powerful force for good on the earth in these last days, the church needs to do this. and I love my church, and I am following the commandment of Jesus Christ, which was a commandment that we are to ask, and we are to seek, and we are to knock. Anybody that criticizes us for even asking the question is not following the commandments of Jesus Christ, because he has told us to ask for what we want. And I think asking is the first step, and this Ordain Women movement is very important in holding up the light so that other people can ask as well. Thank you.
We'd like to end with a couple of comments from two of the people who submitted profiles. Jess, are you here? She was here. Okay, well, she wrote out her comments, and so Kate and I will read April and Jessica's comments.
And this is in response to a lot of the questions we got online, which is, why are you doing this? And do you feel called? Is it your mission? Why did you put up your profile? So this is from April Young Bennett. She said, when I was invited to share my profile on Ordain Women, my first reflexive feeling was fear of censure and discipline. But then I remembered that God had not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. When I think soundly, I realize that if it is appropriate to ask church leaders why to discriminate slightly less against women, why shouldn't I say what I mean and ask directly for what I believe is right? I believe women and men should be treated as equals and given equal opportunities, not that women should be treated slightly less unequally.
Jessica said, tonight I spoke with my grandmother for the first time about my feminist concerns with the church. She didn't identify with them and gave me typical responses like, women get to be mothers, or men need the priesthood or they wouldn't do anything, and women share the priesthood with their husbands. Finally, I told her that I wished I could baptize my son, Asher, when he turns 8 in a few months. Through tears, I told her that I want to be a part of this saving ordinance and that currently I can't even serve as a witness. When she asked what my husband would do, I suggested that he could confirm him a member of the church and give him the gift of the Holy Ghost. If we both held the priesthood, we could both participate in this important rite that welcomes our child into his religious community and starts him on the path to eternal salvation.
And don't forget to join us on August 26th for the Interfaith Fast and on October 5th for the Priesthood session.
Send in your profile, and if you'd like to continue the conversation, come to our Facebook page. We'd be happy to continue it.